Apocalyptic. In a recent book entitled Jesus, Apocalyptic Prophet of the New Millennium, Dr. Bart Ehrman writes, quote, according to this way of thinking being apocalyptic, God was still in control of this world in some ultimate sense, but for unknown and mysterious reasons, he had temporarily relinquished his control to the forces of evil that opposed him. The state of affairs, however, was not to last forever. Quite soon, God would reassert himself and bring this world back to himself, destroying the forces of evil and establishing his people as rulers over the earth. Ehrman continues, when this new kingdom came, God would fulfill his promises to his people. This point of view, as I have said, is commonly called apocalypticism. It was an ideology that tried to make sense of the oppression of the people of God. As you've probably inferred, and as I will lay out, Ehrman writes, more fully in chapter 8, I think it was a view embraced by the historical Jesus. That's why the title of this book is Jesus, Apocalyptic Prophet of the New Millennium. So to Bart Ehrman, Jesus is an apocalypticist. And he lays out what he means by that. This is a big-time scholar, folks. He's atheist, but he's very well known. For Bart Ehrman, Jesus was an apocalyptic prophet because Jesus espoused the idea of theocracy, God's rule, and proclaimed it with certainty as to occur very soon. This, in effect, is Ehrman's appropriation of the 19th century category, apocalyptic. In his introduction to the New Testament, Ehrman defines apocalypticism as, quote, a worldview held by many ancient Jews and Christians that maintained that the present age is controlled by forces of evil, but that these will be destroyed at the end of time when God intervenes in history to bring in his kingdom, an event thought to be imminent. Turning to another scholar, Vicky Balabansky, in her excellent overview of synoptic eschatological discourses like Mark chapter 13, she notes the following, quote, if an apocalypse is characterized by the following features, which she's about to lay out, Mark chapter 13 fits the description only partially. She thinks it can only partially be called an apocalyptic discourse. Here's what she lays out. Against these features, against a background of persecution and spiritual turmoil, a series of visions is granted to a seer. These visions are generally mediated by an angelic being and call those who are still faithful among the people of God to endurance, because the present age of darkness will soon be at an end. There is an urgent expectation of the impending overthrow of all earthly conditions everywhere, in a vast cosmic catastrophe. The language is veiled in secrecy and is rich in symbolism and mythical imagery. Okay. So for Dr. Vicky Balabansky, then, what distinguishes Mark chapter 13 from other so-called apocalypses is that in Mark 13 there is no vision. Remember, she said one of the features is you have to have a series of visions or vision. And there's no angelic mediator or interpreter. So for her, that's the reason why we can't call it an apocalypse. You got to have those four features she lays out. That makes it an apocalypse. That makes an apocalypse an apocalypse. Got you? Got that? Everybody got that? Okay. But Dr. Bruce Molina adds that much more is lacking in Mark chapter 13. First of all, the presumed background of persecution and spiritual turmoil? What? presumed to lie at the root of apocalypse is not present yet. Neither is their concern with the present age. Rather, the focus of Mark chapter 13 is with the present temple.
Not the whole structure of society.
Further, Dr. Molina adds, there is no urgent expectation of the impending overthrow of all earthly conditions in Mark 13. What does Mark chapter 13 talk about? You see these great stones, Master? The temple buildings? They're going to be destroyed, says Jesus. Then he goes and sits at the Mount of Olives apart, so you can see that, and it says, apart, away from the temple, just, in view of the temple. And he said, when will all these things happen, say Peter and Andrew and James and John? All what? All things at the end of time? Everything blowing up all over the earth? No. When will the temple and its temple city be destroyed? And everything that follows in this so-called eschatological discourse, this so-called synoptic apocalypse, merely concerns Jerusalem and the temple. That's what he's talking about. What is expected is not an overthrow, a cosmic catastrophe of all earthly conditions, but a war that will destroy the temple and the city of Jerusalem, which is a temple city. That's very clear. How do people miss it? And there's no vast cosmic catastrophe involved, just the usual concern with celestial territoriality, the sky, the part of the sky over the affected area. Celestial territoriality, to account for the usual effects produced by a sky during the period of war. Moreover, Dr. Molina adds, there is no language veiled in secrecy in Mark chapter 13. Remember, that's what Balabansky said. It has to be veiled in secrecy. No, it's just plain, ordinary language known to persons enculturated in Israel of the first century. Jesus speaks very plainly. And finally, Dr. Molina notes, there is little, if any, symbolism and mythical imagery. Just the usual symbols and imagery of the everyday world. As a matter of fact, none of the features of apocalypse that Balabansky lays out are found in Mark chapter 13. The synoptic apocalypse. Consider John J. Collins' well-known definition of apocalypse as genre, as further expanded by Adele Yarbrough Collins. Quote, apocalypse is a genre of revelatory literature with a narrative framework in which a revelation is mediated by an otherworldly being to a human recipient, disclosing a transcendent reality which is both temporal, insofar as it envisages eschatological salvation, and spatial, insofar as it involves another supernatural world, intended to interpret the present earthly circumstances in light of the supernatural world and of the future, and to influence both the understanding and the behavior of the audience by means of divine authority. Wow. And look at all those terms: transcendent, otherworldly, eschatological salvation, another supernatural world. That sounds like all a bunch of stuff from our modern world projected into the text. As Bruce Molina will explain to us later on, this definition of apocalypse is obviously too ethnocentric to Westerners to be of use to serious historians studying the first century and its documents, the 27 documents of the New Testament. And the new features in this expanded definition by Yarbrough Collins, intended to interpret the present earthly circumstances in light of the supernatural world and of the future, and to influence both the understanding and behavior of the audience by means of divine authority, are still insufficient to characterize Mark chapter 13 as apocalyptic.